It is here at last, the final Sunday of Advent for 2014. I was so excited I started the service 3 minutes early. All of the candles of the wreath are lit, except of course the white candle for Christmas. Today after the service there will be the greeting of the church and the creche will be brought out and placed before the altar. At the family service on Christmas Eve, the children will place all the characters in their rightful places, and we will talk about who they are, and that's at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. I am sure there will be a flurry of activity after the service with all kinds of electricity bouncing off the walls and the windows as we get ready. And I'm sure there's electricity in each and every one of your homes as well. This energy will be building up in our hearts and our eyes as we near this blessed event. Today, let us turn our thoughts to Mary, the mother of Jesus. It is about time to focus on this incredible young woman, a young girl, a child by our standards. Before we do that, however, let's look at a very familiar theme in the Bible, infertility. We go back to the Old Testament to recall the women who were barren, surrounded by other women, and oftentimes sister wives or maids who did have children. In a culture back then when a woman was totally defined by husband and children, especially sons, that was a very painful experience. The women we remember are Sarah, wife of Abraham, Rachel, wife of Jacob, Hannah, wife of Elkanah, and then we move on to the New Testament with Elizabeth, wife of Zechariah. This was serious. With their prayers to God, however, each one was blessed and eventually bore children. Sarah had Isaac, Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin, Hannah had Samuel and some others, and Elizabeth had John the Baptizer. Their prayers had been answered and their motherly hopes and dreams had been fulfilled. Now, I am going to refer back to the first book of Samuel. I know today's Old Testament is all about David in the second book of Samuel, but he is just going to have to be patient and wait his turn for another day. I hope the lectionary police do not arrest me today, but the women are going to be heard. When we look back at Hannah, we remember the story of how she had prayed so hard to the Lord. The priest Eli assumed Hannah must have been drunk. Are you kidding me? Because he saw her lips move, but her voice was silent. Hannah, bless her heart, had the courage to speak out against this false accusation. I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time. Eli recognized his mistake and told her, "Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." I wonder if he mumbled this in his embarrassment, or did he proclaim it with humility in Hannah's presence? Hannah does bear a son, Samuel, and is blessed with the wonders of motherhood. Out of gratitude to God, she promises her son to be a Nazirite for all time and gives the toddler, Samuel, to Eli to serve the Lord. Can you imagine the pain involved with this decision? A toddler? The commitment that this woman had made to God? Her story does not end here, however, for she goes on to have 3 more sons and 2 daughters. But Samuel was never physically present with her again. That's Hannah's story, but there's something more that certainly relates to today's story about Mary. Last Sunday, we all recited Canticle 15, and you heard a little bit of that this morning in the service, the Magnificat, written by Luke in his Gospel. Listen to Hannah's prayer offered to God that is found in the first book of Samuel. See if it sounds familiar. My heart exults in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. There is no Holy One like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. Luke borrowed from Hannah's powerful prayer offered to God and has given Mary similar words to speak. The major difference is that Mary had not been barren before she spoke her words. The story about women and infertility is sharply different from Mary's story. Of course, Mary does suffer later as she does have to give up her firstborn, not to a priest as Hannah did, but to the entire world. One with people of high and low birth status, insiders and outcasts, Jews and Gentiles, all who would follow the teachings of her son. Who doesn't love the story of Mary and Gabriel that we heard from Luke this morning? It is beautifully written and full of wonder. Many famous artists have tried to capture this moment with Gabriel and Mary on canvas or in song. On its own, there was a sense of awe, but there is an even deeper story behind this. We have a young girl who is visited by an angel in a very rural area of Galilee. This was a town of fishermen and people who worked very hard for a living. God chose Mary, the favored one, as greeted by Gabriel this special day in the 6th month. Again, Mary was still a child by our standards, but by the wedding customs of her culture, she was of age to be betrothed to Joseph the carpenter, a man much older than she. As Jesus usually twisted the conventional stories of his time, so this story about Mary is a variation. The passage right before this one tells about how Mary's cousin Elizabeth had been unable to have children. Zechariah, in his disbelief about her pregnancy, was struck dumb until the arrival of their son John. Again, today we do not have a barren older woman, but a young girl who has not asked God to give her children because she was not fully married to Joseph yet. Mary had not experienced the burden, sorrow, or pain of not getting pregnant. Her life was still very much ahead of her. Mary was chosen, however, to bear the Son of God, Jesus. And this was a choice Mary had. A choice. Mary could have said no to this message that Gabriel had handed her. After all, to say yes was to risk her own life and her society. We remember this story from Matthew that Joseph was just going to quietly turn her loose from the betrothal agreement, rather than demanding her to be stoned to death, which would have been his right. Gabriel approached Joseph in a dream to stay the course with this young woman. Would Mary have totally understood that to be the favored one meant to get pregnant outside the marriage covenant? That this favored status would have her live through the agony of the beloved son being executed as a criminal in the Roman legal system? We get caught up with the beautiful nativity scene images and overlook how scandalous this would have been for Mary and Joseph. From a book by Frederick Buechner entitled Peculiar Treasures. Mary struck the angel Gabriel as hardly old enough to have a child at all, let alone this child. But he'd been entrusted with a message to give her, and he gave it. He told her what the child was to be named and who he was to be, and something about the mystery that was to come upon her. "You mustn't be afraid, Mary," he said. And as he said it, he only hoped she wouldn't notice that beneath the great golden wings, He himself was trembling with fear to think that the whole future of creation hung now on the answer of a girl. Again, Mary could have said no. Then this young girl who was initially afraid, now who wouldn't be afraid if an angel plopped down and told you what was going to happen? She says with certainty and great faith, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." In that moment, Mary was changed, transformed forever, as are we. Mary accepted this precious gift and prayed aloud those wonderful words of the Magnificat that echo those prayerful words of Hannah who came before her. These women, in different circumstances and places, freely gave of themselves. We know from our perspective in history that great changes did come from Jesus in this world of first century Palestine and on into the 21st century world we live today. This announcement gives us hope. This child of God who entered a world where there is much violence and corruption gave us the tools and understanding of how at any point in history we can be transformed by experiencing the love and compassion of God. Yes, wars and terrible things have happened since that first Christmas and that first Easter. Sadly, this violence continues to infect our world, in our own country, and in countries far away, such as the horrific tragedy in Pakistan last week, killing 130 children out of 148 people. For us, who take on this identity as Christian, however, we can make a difference when these events do happen. The world seems to come together at this time of Advent, although Christmas gets the credit. The great acts of charity and caring do occur. Once again, the food banks are replenished, children of poverty are given toys and presents. We reach out to our neighbors and one another to express this feeling of joy. We expect good things to happen this time of year. We hunker down with our families and friends to breathe in the love we feel for each other. We even try to make amends with those we are out of sorts with in an attempt to take a better path. And we need to remember those who at this time of year it is not a joyful one. There are those who suffer greatly during this time of Christmas. And if you know someone, this is the time to reach out to them as well. If we can come together in these final days of Advent and the approaching days of the Christmas season, the question for us is, how can we sustain this throughout the year? We are given the chance to welcome this Christ child into our hearts again. God chose a young woman to be the mother of Christ, and we are forever joined in the life of Christ and He with us. Emmanuel, God within us. Jesus fully experienced humanity. It was not just a trick or magic. God knows us, and we know God through Jesus. This invitation to one another to work and pray together in love and mutual respect is ongoing, not just for a few short weeks. Let this spirit of joy and unity with the divine continue throughout our lives. Let us pray. Again, I take a prayer from Stephen Shakespeare. God of impossible love, you needed Mary to give consent to bear the scandal, to carry your word within herself. May her courage give hope to women and men who yearn to sing new songs of justice and find the world a dwelling place for God through Jesus Christ, the one who is to come.